YCS Bologna is in the books. Nearly 2,500 duelists traveled to Italy and the great city of Bologna, but only one was crowned the champion. My name is MegaCapital and I spent a good portion of my weekend watching the live stream, reading posts on social media from high-end duelists, and checking up on all the coverage so that you didn't have to. This is what the heck happened at YCS Bologna 2023. So as I initially mentioned, this event was gigantic with 2,488 duelists entering, or 2,500 if we round up a bit. It should go without saying, but this is super impressive, and at this point, as crazy as it sounds, European YCS events are just flat out larger than the ones that we have over here in North America. This is something I've been paying attention to for a while now, and EU events have, really they've just exploded in terms of their numbers. Basically every European YCS now gets over 2,000 people, and usually it's closer to 2,300 to 2,500. Obviously we can do this in North America too, with recent events like YCS Philadelphia in the summer and YCS Los Angeles prior to that doing phenomenal numbers, but we do have some duds here and there like YCS Vancouver, which was only about 800 players if my memory serves me. Europe, on the other hand, essentially doesn't have small YCS tournaments anymore, which really, in my opinion, calls for a round of applause for the European player base. Now, this could be because Europe is more condensed as a continent in comparison to like North America. You know, there's so many European countries, but they're like relatively close in proximity in comparison to North America. Also, in Europe, let's just be honest, the live stream coverage is infinitely better. I say this even as someone who lives in Dene. Their coverage is much more appealing. It's way more charming. It's more energetic. I personally like their commentators more. It looks like they're having fun. I even follow some of them on social media. Personally, it's just something that I enjoy watching more. But overall, in terms of attendance, it looks like Europe really has the advantage right now. To the actual event, which was as unpredictable as humanly possible, at least in my opinion. Going into the event, I don't think that it was an exaggeration to say that any of maybe 8 to 10 decks could have taken down the entire tournament, and that obviously made for a very wide open field. No surprise that Rescue Ace was one of the most popular decks of the event, but I was personally a bit shocked to learn that Unchained was just as popular, with both decks taking up 12% of the field respectively. Maybe you could argue that it should have been expected because Unchained did come off its YCS Richmond win about a month ago, and the finals was an Unchained mirror match, so the deck did have good momentum, but I personally didn't see that carrying over. Tearlament was the next most popular deck, which was no surprise in my opinion, followed by Pearly and the resident trap deck of the format, Labyrinth. I think that these three, and in that order specifically, was pretty expected. I said in my prediction video that Europeans really love Tearlament, so there was really no surprise that there were tons and tons of people playing that deck. Purely, I think, is just an example of a really good deck that's fully capable of beating anything, but at the same time, it can lose to basically any matchup. And then Labyrinth is also supposed to be really popular in Germany. At least that's what they were saying on the live stream, so I'm gonna take their word for it. It was actually the third most represented country in the tournament. Germany was. So if Germany had a lot of players and Labyrinth is really popular in Germany, it does make sense that Labyrinth was one of the more popular decks of the event. I can't say that I really thought Labyrinth was a great pick for YCS Bologna because I constantly see the deck getting annihilated online when playing against Rescue Ace. However, if you know how to play it really well, it can be an absolute beast of a deck, and it converted really well for the top cuts, including a trip to the semifinals for our current German champion and resident Labyrinth expert Dinkabui. On the subject of top cuts, it was as wide open as the Grand Canyon. All this talk about it being a wide open format and, you know, any deck can win isn't just talk apparently, because we had an absolutely mind-blowing 17 different archetypes, themes, and or decks making it into the top cut. Because this event was so large, of course it was top 64 rather than your standard top 32, and this top cut featured everything but the kitchen sink, such as Rescue Ace, Tearlament, Labyrinth, Unchained, Sinful Fire Kings, Purely, Centurion, Vanquish Soul, Mekanko, Chimera, Branded Despia, Bestial Runic, Bestial Dragon Link, Infernoble, Kashtira of all things, yes, Kashtira actually made the top cut, Marincess, and Sun Avalon Rika. So it's kind of like what I alluded to earlier. I personally feel in this specific format that any competent deck can top right now, as long as as you have like a solid build and a really good pilot, I think you can have success with just about anything. And for instance, I said in my prediction video, and quick side notes on that point, obviously all my predictions were not right, but don't worry, you're going to be getting a where Cap G was wrong video later this week, because I'm just getting lit up for my tier prediction of winning the entire YCS Bologna. I mean, it did get the top 8, but anyways, in my video, I predicted very, very low expectations for Fire King and Centurion. The decks were brand spanking new, and I really didn't think that people would be willing to move off of highly well-established decks that are already meta, like Tier Lament, Unchained, and Rescue Ace, for these new ones. But to my complete surprise, each one put in 4 players in the top cut, which, I mean, I thought that that was really impressive for these decks that have barely been out any time. And I think that if you look at Centurion and Fire Kings and how they performed over the weekend, it's nothing short of a raving success. Diving deeper into the top cut, we also saw some standout performances for Labyrinth, which arguably converted better than any deck of the entire top cut, as well as a fairly poor performance from Unchained, which had nearly double the overall representation of decks like Purely and Labyrinth, however actually put less players in the top cut as Lab, and only a couple more than Purely, despite again having far more representation. Speaking of the little cat deck, Purely just continues to be the definition of a really solid B+ contender. It was tied for 3rd when it came to the most popular deck overall of the event, with Labyrinth, while also tied for 5th when it came to the most spots in the top cut. Purely right now never feels like the favorite to win an event or the odds-on best deck for any tournament, but it always seems to do pretty well, no pun intended. Which, side note, almost feels like the perfect position to be in if you're going into a ban list, or I guess we could say ban list season, because it feels like it's probably on the outskirts of being able to win like the next YCS, but it's nowhere near as likely to get hit as other decks like Rescue Ace, Unchained, or Tier Lament that are far more popular and that are also getting more top cut spots. And most likely Konami's gonna have their eyes on those decks before they look at getting another Purely hit. One thing I have to mention is how numbers were not the be-all end-all this weekend. Legendary player, Master Duel World Champion, super nice guy, and arguably current best Yu-Gi-Oh player in the TCG, if not the entire world, Joshua Smith entered YCS Bologna with admittedly just a comfort pick, and by his own admission, not being in the best position in terms of preparation for the tournament.
All that's left for everyone to do for YCS Bologna is just pick the deck you like the most out of 20 options and chuck the non-engine in that you want to play. That's what I need to do even. Just to let you know, my process currently for YCS Bologna, I don't consider myself very well prepared for the YCS, by the way. Probably the one I've prepared for the least. I've experimented with some stuff. It hasn't worked out to my liking. So now I'm just between, do I just pick a tier 1 deck that I like the most, or do I just pick a comfort pick because at least worst case, I'm gonna have a good time playing it and they still have a good chance of doing well, right?
Josh played Bestial Runic, a deck that combines the disruption and powerful spells of the Bestials with the infinite resource creation and toolbox of Runic, with also a small branded engine which is tied in together with the Bestial cards. He ended up winning the entire event despite being the only Bestial Runic player in the top cut. In fact, I believe that Josh Schmidt was the only player in the entire top cut to play Runic cards at all. Further to this point about numbers not being everything, we also saw Branded Despia, a deck that I actually predicted to make the quarterfinals, actually go one step further and make the semifinals. Much like Josh Schmidt, this was kind of a 1 out of 1 deal because there was only one player playing Branded Despia in the top 64 cut. That player just went way further than a lot of the players who were playing decks that were probably considered significantly better. Pack also did this. He topped while playing Infernoble, making it all the way to the quarterfinals. I was a little puzzled that only one Infernoble player made top cut, especially because, at least in my opinion, I consider Infernoble to have the highest current ceiling in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! I really feel like the top 4 of YCS Bologna perfectly captures this format and how diverse and open it is. It featured Bestial Runic, Branded Despia, Rescue Ace, and Labyrinth. Arguably the best deck of the format, a solid trap deck that you're likely to see and play at any event, and then 2 decks that just seemingly came completely out of nowhere but just tore up the tournament. And I think that's one of the really fun and healthy things about competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now, is even the mid or the quote-unquote bad decks that people don't respect are good enough to compete and even beat the brakes off you if you don't respect them and take them seriously. again, look at the performances from archetypes like Centurion and Vanquish Soul, which, I mean, in my prediction video, I even coined the term Vanquish Soul Syndrome, which means these decks that everyone says they're bad, but then when you look at the results of the actual event, it's like, well, these decks did put in 6 players combined in the top cut. My last point of order that I want to talk about is the winner, who I believe is 100% making a case for the greatest Yu-Gi-Oh player of all time, and that is Joshua Smith. This man is the current Yu-Gi-Oh Master Duel World Champion, but even if you just wanted to focus on the TCG side of things, he did win on YCS last year with Runic Sprite before a Shizu Tier format started, and now he's taking down another YCS this year, which I believe off the top of my head is his 4th YCS championship. He's also made the finals of like 2 or 3 others, so I mean, he's super duper accomplished, that doesn't need to be said. And I like the fact that he did so playing a deck that he was really just comfortable with, rather than playing what he considered to be the absolute best deck of the format, which really is something that I think a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players can learn from. Sometimes it's just best to play what you're comfortable with, to play what you know and you're really good with, the deck that you have experience with, rather than just trying to, you know, pick the best deck and end up making a bunch of misplays. But it was actually phenomenal, you know, a fan favorite winning the event with a deck that I don't really think anyone expected, but everyone knows, you know, Josh Schmidt's love of runic cards because he talks about them all the time. So that was really, really good. And honestly, the format, the meta is just so wide open. But I'll leave it up to you, the viewer. What did you think of YCS Bologna? What was your favorite aspect? I would say, for me personally, outside of Josh Schmidt winning the event, it was the performance of, you know, Centurion and Fire Kings. These are decks that I really didn't expect anything from, and then they both put 4 players into the top cut after being brand new. I mean, that was really impressive. Anyways, whatever you thought, leave that in the comment description below, or leave it in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching, as always.